One sound. That's all it took to turn the biggest night in music into the most uncomfortable moment on live television in 2026. Not a wardrobe malfunction, not a slap, something the producers couldn't cut away from fast enough. Inside Crypto.com Arena, February 1st. Kendrick, Bad Bunny, Sabrina Carpenter, Lady Gaga. A reaction ripped through the audience that wasn't in anybody's script. Raw, sharp, the kind of sound that makes a publicist's blood run cold. The two people at the center of it? No nomination, no performance, no award. They walked in anyway, and the room told them exactly what it thought. Because this wasn't some late night talk show segment. This wasn't a protest outside a premiere. This was the Grammys. The same stage where Kendrick Lamar made history that night with 5 wins. Where Bad Bunny took home Album of the Year. Where Trevor Noah hosted for the 6th and final time. A room full of the most powerful people in music. Choreographed to perfection. And somehow the most talked about moment of the night had nothing to do with any of them. So here's the question nobody in that room wanted to ask out loud. How did two of the most polarizing figures on the planet end up walking into a space that clearly didn't want them there? And why did the reaction feel so deeply, uncomfortably personal? But here's what most people watching at home completely missed. The tension started long before the cameras ever rolled. At first, the moment was almost surreal. Cameras cut away. Smiles froze mid-formation. A split second of confusion hung in the air like static electricity. You could read it on the faces in the crowd, the hesitation, the side eye, the quiet internal math of whether to clap politely or sit absolutely still. Then the sound grew, not unanimous, but unmistakable. Boos, heckling. A kind of collective discomfort that no publicist on earth could spin into something flattering. This wasn't supposed to happen. Award shows are choreographed ecosystems. Guest lists are vetted weeks in advance. Seating charts are strategic. Reactions are managed. When someone walks into that room, the assumption is simple. They belong. Or at the very least, everyone has agreed to pretend they do. So when that agreement breaks on live television, it tells you something fundamental has shifted. And this didn't come out of nowhere. Crowds don't turn like that without history. This reaction, whether you call it cruelty, overdue honesty, or long simmering backlash, carried the weight of years. Years of interviews, years of headlines, years of carefully curated narratives colliding head-on with public fatigue in real time. And if you think the boos were bad, wait until you hear what was happening backstage, because that's where the real story lives. Think about this. When was the last time a major awards audience reacted this emotionally to someone who wasn't even nominated? Not a performer, not a presenter, not connected to a single project being celebrated that night. That's what made the sting so sharp. It wasn't about music. It wasn't about art. It was about presence. About whether the story the public had been sold was still working, or whether the room had finally decided it was done playing along. Because according to multiple accounts that surfaced in the days after, the discomfort started long before anyone walked into that arena. Backstage conversations reportedly went cold. Familiar industry faces became suddenly distant. There were fewer warm greetings, more tight-lipped nods that said I see you without saying I'm with you. And that distinction matters. In rooms like this, support isn't loud. It's who stands next to you. It's who makes space at their table. And on that night, the space felt limited. This tracks with something that's been building quietly across 2026. Reports emerged just weeks ago that celebrities are now actively avoiding close association with the couple. A Variety report noted that top creative talent has shown little interest in collaborating with them, with one insider saying the couple can't seem to find any top-line creatives willing to invest in joint projects. Anna Wintour reportedly passed on extending a Met Gala invite. Even their Montecito neighbors, according to multiple outlets, have been keeping a careful distance. Now here's where it gets really uncomfortable, because the boos weren't just noise. They were a message nobody could unsend. The boos cracked the surface, but the real damage was in what didn't happen. No standing ovation, no wave of supportive applause to drown out the negativity, no immediate rescue from a friendly famous face stepping in to redirect attention. Just an awkward transition in a room trying to pretend nothing unusual had occurred, but something had. Everyone felt it. And here's the contradiction that makes this so hard to dismiss. For years, the narrative leaned heavily on being outsiders, on rejection, on mistreatment by institutions and tabloids. And yet there they were, front and center at one of the most elite gatherings on the planet, not sidelined. visible. But visibility cuts both ways. The more people see you, the more they judge. The more you speak, the more audiences decide whether they're still listening. That tension has only sharpened in 2026. Their Netflix relationship has been described by Variety as far from a fairy tale, with the streaming giant reportedly exhausted by what insiders call repackaged versions of the same story. Their lifestyle brand, As Ever, has faced questions about direction and performance. A Vanity Fair expose revived workplace bullying allegations, with a former staffer describing the experience as really awful. Their talent agency Woomi reportedly experienced friction significant enough that key team members quietly stepped back from the account. And a royal biographer's new book alleged that the couple had become so isolated that old friendships simply evaporated. This next part is the detail everyone's been talking about behind closed doors, and it changes everything about how you see that night. So when the heckling broke through the applause at the Grammys, maybe the shock wasn't that it happened. Maybe the shock was that it took this long. Because the boos weren't just about personalities, they were about fatigue, a growing sense that the narrative had stopped evolving, that every public appearance felt like a replay of the same themes, the same grievances, the same framing, just with different outfits in a different venue. Audiences change, cultural appetites shift, and what once felt brave starts to feel performative when it's repeated without reflection. That's not cruelty, that's a cultural shift. And cultural shifts don't announce themselves with press releases. They show up as withheld applause, as awkward silences, as rooms full of powerful people who suddenly stop pretending. Some people in that room weren't just uncomfortable, they were angry. Angry at the perception of entitlement. Angry at being used as backdrops in someone else's ongoing personal saga. Angry that a night meant to celebrate artistry had been hijacked by tension that had nothing to do with music. And once anger enters a room like that, politeness disappears fast. Which raises a chilling possibility. What if the invitation wasn't about honoring anyone? What if it was a temperature check, a gamble to see whether the public and the industry would still play along? If that's true, the answer came back loud and clear, and what happened after the broadcast might be the most telling part of all, because the doors that used to open are closing one by one. By the end of the night, the boos had faded, but the echo didn't. Moments like this don't live in the broadcast. They live in group chats, in quiet industry conversations over Monday morning coffee, in the subtle recalculations that happen when gatekeepers decide who still belongs in which rooms. The 2026 landscape tells that story plainly. No Met Gala invite. Celebrities reportedly thinking twice before attending the same events. A royal restoration strategy that backfired spectacularly after private conditions for a family reunion were leaked to the press, and a ranker poll that placed Meghan among the most disliked public figures in America, a ranking that persisted through the first quarter of this year. That doesn't mean exile, it doesn't mean disappearance, but it does mean recalibration, fewer automatic invitations. More hesitation at the door, more maybe next time conversations behind closed doors. And that might be the hardest part to accept. Because boos can be dismissed, blamed on bad acoustics, attributed to a few rogue audience members. But indifference, the slow closing of doors that once swung open effortlessly, that's much harder to fight. So when people ask whether the reaction was deserved, they might be asking the wrong question entirely. The real question is simpler and far more uncomfortable. What does it mean when even the most controlled rooms in the world stop pretending? Was this a one-night backlash or the first visible crack in a carefully managed image that's finally run out of audience goodwill? That's for you to decide. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Were the boos crossing a line, or was the room finally saying what it had been holding back for years? Subscribe and stay with us, because stories like this don't end on one stage.